Welcome back. My name is Chris Lee. This is episode 2 of a recent webinar series I did. Today we're talking all about goal setting. Goal setting is super important, and it's one of the foundational pieces of my coaching practice. If you don't have a plan laid out for you, then life is just going to happen to you, and you wind up reacting more so than acting. I'm trying to prevent that. I'm trying to give you the tools that you need to set yourself up for success and to ensure that you are living the life that you want and not what somebody else wants. Inside, I'm going to give you the step-by-step guide that I use with all of my clients on how to structure your goals in a specific way to ensure a greater likelihood of success moving forward. So if that's something you're interested in, stick around and we'll see you in there. Today, we're going to talk about goal setting. Some of these stories you have heard before, but I think they still carry some truth to them. So I'm going to repeat them. And if you get super bored, that'll be okay. It'll be all right. But the intent behind today is to focus on how to structure your goals and how to set them up in such a way that they are best serving you, to include backwards planning and those long-term visions that we usually talk about. Awesome. Cool. Any questions before we get rolling? Nadia has a giant fluff ball.
Maybe I have a quick question.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Chris, guys, what did you eat for breakfast? Because I know it's very early morning there.
Uh, this right here, cup of coffee. I'm on my second or third one. That's usually what I do for breakfast. I was into intermittent fasting for a long time, and so I typically don't get very hungry until after lunch anyway. And then I usually have my first meal around lunchtime.
Oh, but that's really good. Yeah.
Awesome. All righty. So last night we talked about purpose and how to begin envisioning that purpose for our life. Another way to say that is the legacy that we want to leave behind. The analogy that I gave that we had some great discussion on was imagining this big block of marble that you want to create into your life's purpose. And so you start chiseling away at the pieces that don't belong, chiseling away at the pieces that aren't the art, right? And so we dug into that and what that kind of starts to look like. Today, we're going to focus primarily on how to get real specific with envisioning the future and how to set that up so you're set up for success moving forward. But as mentioned last night, I am an Army veteran, which means we love to tell stories. So I'm going to tell one now. I graduated the Q course in 2016, and it was during a time when everyone was getting free fall school. So free fall school is falling out of airplanes, but it's a little bit different than your standard airborne operation. So airborne school, it's a 3-week course where your parachute is tied to a rope that's then tied to the airplane. So when you fall out of the aircraft, the rope pulls your parachute for you, and you don't really have to do a whole lot of thinking other than how to land without breaking your legs. Free fall school is a little bit different in that you're jumping at a significantly higher altitude. You are in charge of pulling your own ripcord, so you're not attached to the airplane. You've got like an altimeter. It's very similar to like modern day skydiving and civilian skydiving. All right, so graduate the Q course. Everybody gets shipped off to free fall school. I got through that course and graduated just fine. And I immediately got orders to Stuttgart, Germany. And if you've ever been to Germany, the weather isn't always great. And so doing airborne operations wasn't always a thing that could happen. Additionally, I was a brand new Green Beret, and when I showed up to my team, they were all super salty that I got free fall school right out of the Q course, and a lot of them had never gone. And so, like my first day walking in the team room, they asked me how many free fall jumps I got, and I said, "Well, it was 25, Sergeant." All right, start pushing. And so I had to do push-ups because I got a school that I didn't volunteer for. They told me to go, but that's okay. It all worked out. Okay, so I get through free fall school. I get to my first duty station in Germany. I don't jump any free fall while in Germany. So for 3 years, I had this qualification, but didn't really just have the opportunity to make it happen. 2019, I get stationed in Fort Carson, Colorado. So I moved back here, and as luck would have it, I get put on a free fall team. So every ODA or Green Beret team has like a specialty. There's like dive teams. Those guys are usually pretty jacked. You got ruck teams that is really just a fancy way they carry everything on their back. And you have free fall teams, which is what I landed on. Our specialty was jumping out of airplanes at high altitude, stacking up together in the sky under canopy, and flying to our destination relatively quiet. Okay, so I have this qualification. I am super rusty because it's been 3 years since I've jumped at altitude like that. And now I'm on a team that's their whole specialty. Awesome. And and as I've mentioned before in other discussions, the first rule of special operations is always look cool. And so that rule was in my head, and I was concerned that I was going to mess up and look like a dweeb. So our first trip together as me on the new guy to this team and us working together as a team was to go down to Arizona to do a requalification, which is really just we wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page with how to fall out of an airplane correctly and do the operations in the sky. I had the good fortune that three of the guys that were on my team had been instructors down in Arizona before. So they have thousands and thousands and thousands of jumps each. And so they are very comfortable in the sky, which was awesome because when things happen, they're very cool, calm, and collected when they're coming over the radio and talking to you. So okay, so we get down to Arizona, and I'm nervous because I'm a brand new guy. I'm rusty at this particular skill set, and now I have to do it in front of a bunch of really cool guys. We get out to the aircraft. We're doing Monday morning. It's referred to as a Hollywood jump, which is just your parachute, your helmet, and your altimeter. We get out to the aircraft, and they put me kind of in the middle of the stack to ensure that they could keep an eye on me. We get up to altitude, which is about 12 to 14,000 feet. We stand up, we do our final safety checks on each other. The ramp drops open, and we get that green light. And the first couple guys dive out of the back of the airplane. I get to the edge of the ramp, and I kept thinking, don't look dumb, don't look dumb, don't look dumb. And I dive out. I had a great exit. I get on heading, I check my altimeter, pull my ripcord, everything goes perfect. And I breathe this like big sigh of relief. I'm like, it's just like riding a bike. I can do this. So I land on the ground, and as the week progressed, I just felt more and more confident that this skill set was kind of coming back to me, and I was stoked. But as the week progressed, we just started adding more and more equipment to ourselves until Friday we were doing what's called a wall locker jump. Everything in our wall locker is now attached to us. I had a rucksack between my legs. My rifle was strapped across my waist. I had an oxygen tank with a hose and mask. I had a chest rig that had GPS and a boat compass on it. So we were pretty weighed down. We waddle out to the aircraft. Again, I'm still middle of the stack, but I'm feeling good. I'm like, the dust has been shaken off. I'm feeling pretty good about this process. We get up to altitude, so 12 to 14,000 feet. We stand up, do our final safety checks on each other. Ramp drops open. We get that green light. First couple guys dive out. I get to the edge of the ramp. I dive out, had a great exit, get on heading, check my altimeter, pull ripcord, and I look up and I've got line twists. So line twists, if you're going to have a malfunction with your air or with your parachute, this is the one you want because it's super easy to fix. Line twists are the lines that are going from your harness to the canopy have just twisted. And all you got to do is grab them, pull them apart, and do a little bicycle kick with your feet, and you eventually unwind and you're good to go. So keep that in mind. I'm looking up, I've got line twists. I begin solving that problem by pulling apart. But something I should mention is free fall parachutes are designed a little bit different than airborne parachutes. Airborne chutes are generally kind of circular or kind of square, but they're designed to just drop you straight down. Free fall chutes, they're designed more like a wing. And so they're very maneuverable, and every vertical foot you drop, it drives you forward 3 feet. So you can actually travel really far distances in the sky silently. So as I'm unwinding myself, my parachute kicks me out sideways. So now I'm almost parallel to the ground, but due to the shape of the canopy, it now is driving me towards the earth. And then I begin to spiral. So, okay, I've got a problem now. My lines are twisted, which means I don't have any control over my parachute. I'm now spiraling towards the earth, losing altitude the whole time. And and because I was whipping around the sky so fast, the blood was rushing from my head to my feet, and I was beginning to get tunnel vision. Like my vision was closing in like this. The good news is I had the rest of my life to solve that problem. That is an old free fall joke that the rest of your life is about 90 seconds in that particular circumstance. So I'm still trying to unwind myself. I'm shouting expletives at this canopy that is not working. And somebody more senior or somebody that has had more jumps or has been more experienced would have just cut that parachute away. That's why you pack a reserve. If something goes terribly wrong, you just cut that one away and pull your reserve and you'll be fine. And I should have done that. After my first spiral, I should have cut that parachute away because I couldn't control it and I was losing altitude, pulled my reserve. I did not do that. I rode that wave like it was my job. And so my team sergeant later told me he saw me do about 7 to 9 revolutions in the sky, uh, all the while like shouting at this thing. Finally, at kind of like the last second before my vision closes off into blackness, my lines untwist, and so I grab my brakes and I yank them real hard, and that levels me out. So now I'm under good canopy, but I'm incredibly dizzy. My whole world is just spinning in circles still, and that's when everyone on the team starts yelling over the radio. They're yelling, "Chris, turn around! You're going the wrong way. Chris, go left. No, your other left. Chris, check your GPS on your chest rig." So I look down at my GPS, and that sucker is just spinning in circles because I'm so dizzy. And at this point, I'm like nervous laughing because I'm in a situation that I just solved kind of a big problem a second ago. But now I have another problem, which is I don't know where I am. I don't know where any of my friends are in the sky, and I'm clearly going in the wrong direction, and I don't know which way is up. About that time, there's a break in the radio chatter, and Matt comes over the radio. Matt is one of my favorite people, but he is the grumpiest man I know. He is only happy when he's falling out of an airplane and flying in the sky. But he comes over the radio and he's very calm and he says, "Chris, turn towards the sun." So we happen to be jumping in the morning and our drop zone was generally east of us. And so I look around in the sky. The sun is directly behind me. So I hit a hard left turn. And about that time, my buddy Andy swoops in front of me and guides me to the DZ, and we all land together. And I pull my oxygen mask off and I'm just dry heaving because I'm still super nauseous. Later that night, I take Matt out for a couple of beers because I owed him one. And he explained to me that what I experienced is what he calls the Phoenix phenomenon. He says, "Chris, there's a device in everyone's parachute called a cypress, and it is designed to deploy your reserve if it indicates that you are falling too fast and it hits a certain altitude." So if I were to exit the aircraft and hit my head and we're just unconscious, falling through the sky at terminal velocity, once I hit a certain altitude, that Cypress would recognize that, fire, and deploy my reserve for me, even if I was unconscious, so I could land relatively safely. But he says, "Chris, because you were spiraling, you weren't falling fast enough for that to have happened. You would have burned in like a phoenix." And I said to Matt, I was like, "Thank you. I appreciate the reminder." All right. So, Chris, what is the point of the story? The point of the story is we have to have a very clear direction. We have to have this bright sun in the sky that we can look off to that's in the distance to guide us back on track. As all of you know, life carries with it a great deal of chaos, often day to day. And if all we can focus on is the chaos, the nauseous, the world spinning out of control feeling, if all we can see is this, then we're going to go in the wrong direction. So the point of today, setting goals, creating identity, is about establishing that sun in the distance where you can, despite all the chaos of day to day, you can look up and say, okay, I'm on track, or I'm way off track. Let me fix myself. So how do we do that? As most of you know, I always begin with identity. Last night we talked about purpose, which is essentially why we wake up every day. Identity is, who do you want to evolve into? What kind of person do you want to be deep down in your guts? So identity is the foundation on which we will stack all goals. Today is titled goal setting, the webinar, but the foundation, and many of you can attest to this, but the foundation is that identity shift. If we don't nail that down first, the goals may or may not happen. The identity shift creates this greater likelihood that the goals get done. So, Chris, what do you mean by identity? Okay, identity is this. If you have a second, close your eyes and picture yourself 5 years from now. Everything is perfect. This is what I want you to visualize. 5 years from now, everything in your life is perfect. As you know, I break life down into a couple of categories: mental, physical, emotional, social, and financial. For each of those categories, envision what perfect looks like for you. What does perfect physical sense of my life look like 5 years from now? Or what does the social capacity of my life, what do the relationships in my life look like if they were perfect 5 years from now? Take a second and just kind of picture that, who you look like in that setting. Okay, now that you've got that kind of picture in your head, this is what I want you to do with that picture. For each of those categories, the mental, physical, emotional, social, financial, create an I am statement. So it's a present tense statement that reflects that future you. And I'll give you a couple examples from my own life. So, in the mental area of my life, my I am statement, my identity that I want to shape my future around in that realm of life is, I am a constant learner. So that's a little bit different than a goal. Sometimes folks, when we begin this process, they say, all right, I am a PhD, or I am a doctor, or okay, that's something you have achieved. Identity is a little bit different. Identity is the kind of person you want to be. So again, for my mental category of life, I am a constant learner. And that then shapes the goals that I try to establish in that realm. Another one is emotional. So the kind of person that I want to evolve into in the emotional area of life is, I am the calmest man in the room. When I walk into a room, I want to be the one that, like, people can breathe a sigh of relief because I exude that kind of calmness when I walk in. And part of the reason I want to do that is because I think people that remain calm can solve problems better amidst chaos. So that's kind of my intent behind it. A lot of you have gone through this practice already and established those identity statements. It's okay to revisit those and relook at those. So I'm going to give you about a minute to pick one or two categories and dial that I am statement in. If you have questions about this process in the next 60 seconds or so, just get my attention and I'll answer those. But I'm going to give you about a minute to pick one or two of those. Okay, cool. hopefully you were able to at least write down one for one of those categories. And you might be asking, Chris, why do you break life down like that? Why can't I just do one identity for my life? The reason behind that is I think it's actually hard to compartmentalize life. I think if you're lacking discipline or lacking consistency in one area, it will bleed over into the other areas. And so my solution to that is to break life down into categories and then address each one individually. Now, each of those categories could have subcategories to it, but I think these are the heavy hitters. And if you get these and nail these down well, you're set up for success. Okay, now that we have an identity statement, we have this foundation on which we can stack goals. Now we start stacking goals. Going back to my example of the mental category, I am a constant learner. The goal that I associated with that when I first set that up was I will read a book a week for 5 years. That's a lot of books. And my thought was if I read that much, then I will probably get a little bit smarter at the end of that time. So I start moving along in this direction, and I'm reading a book a week. And then, as you know, life happens, and I start getting behind schedule. And I started feeling a little bit guilty, and I'm like, all right, Chris, get it together. And then I got really behind schedule, and I'm just like riddled with like guilt and shame because I can't keep up with this one simple task that I've given myself. And as a result, I just started grabbing whatever quick read I could get through as fast as possible just to get my numbers back up. It was like short novels or short stories or whatever, anything that I could burn through as fast as possible so I could get back on track. And I did that for a little while, and I took a pause and said, all right, wait a second. Is this behavior in alignment with the kind of person I want to be in this category of life? And the answer was no. But I wouldn't have been able to answer that question if I didn't have the identity first. If I didn't lay out this foundation of like, I am a constant learner, if I didn't have that first, then I would have just struggled through that goal continually, not actually aligning my identity with who I'm becoming. And so the identity is super important. Lay that foundation first, then attach goals to it. All right, Chris, so what did you do then? Well, I adjusted my goal. The goals can be adjusted. The goals are there to serve you, so don't feel beholden to them if they are not serving you. The identity, I view it more as carved in stone, or maybe carved in such a way that like they're firm and you can stand on them. So the identity, I'm a constant learner. The goal wasn't serving that identity, so I adjusted it. The goal now is I care very little about the number of books I read, and I care a great deal about the quality of book I read and how much I can retain from it. I was actually talking to Eric earlier, maybe about a week ago, that my goal this year is actually to just read 4 books, and to really read 4 books. And that's not because I'm a slow reader. I'm like a medium reader. But my hope is that I take those 4 books and really dig into them and dissect them and pull them apart and write notes and really digest them and own them. That's the goal. So because I had that foundation laid first, that identity was firm in place, I can adjust the goal if the goal was not serving that identity. Does that make sense to everybody? Perfect. Okay, Chris, how do you set up a goal? Glad you asked. I use the SMART acronym because it works. Somebody else came up with it. I'm not sure who, but I give them all the credit because this is a great system to structure your goals. It's the SMART acronym, and each letter stands for something different. So if you got a pen and paper, write this down. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. So we're going to break each of those down. Specific. People get hung up on this part. I found particularly when they make like New Year's resolutions, they say, Chris, I want to be healthier for 2025. Awesome. You didn't tell me anything though. Healthier might be replacing 1 meal a week with a salad. That technically is achieving that goal, but it's probably not really what you had in mind, right? Let's get specific. Okay, 2025, I want to, be able to bench press 225 for reps, back squat 315 for reps, and deadlift 405 for reps. I want to have a body fat percentage of 14% or less. I want to have a resting heart rate of under 50 beats per minute, and I want to be able to sleep consistently 8 hours per night. That is specific. And the reason I harp on this part of it is because now that it's specific, we can measure it, which happens to be the next letter in the acronym. If your goal is too vague, then it's hard to measure. But if it's specific, you now have the means by which to track progress and see if you are on track towards success. So if my goal is to, be able to back squat 315 for reps, and I can only back squat 225 for reps right now, I have a baseline and I have a desired end state. And now I have this space in between which I can measure week to week, month to month to see if I'm going to make my goal. Does that make sense so far? Perfect. Okay. Moving on to the A of the SMART acronym, attainable. I have to tell people often when planning out their goals, and I usually aim for 5 years from today, when planning out their goals, aim bigger than you think. There's a quote Bill Gates came up with, and I paraphrased it, and it goes like this. We often overestimate what we can accomplish in a year, but drastically underestimate what we can accomplish in 5. And there's a great deal of truth to that. Sometimes 365 days feels like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of time. And so if you're trying to pack in a bunch of stuff, particularly in 5 different areas of life into 1 year, it is more likely that you will be overwhelmed, get burned out, and quit. And so I spread things out over 5 years because a great deal more can take place. Now, Chris, what does that have to do with attainable? I say all of that because I want you to aim really, really big for your goals. But having said that, I will be the first to tell you, Chris Lee, will never play in the National Basketball Association. 1, because I don't like basketball, and 2, I'm not very good at it. And so there's a fine line between aiming huge, aiming big for your goals, and maintaining realistic expectations. If you have other questions about that, write them down. We'll tackle those towards the end. So, A, attainable. Is your goal realistic? Good. Is it big enough? Make sure it's big enough, particularly for 5 years down the road. Okay. The R in the SMART acronym is relevant. Is this relevant? Okay. This ties back directly to the identity statement that you've given yourself. The goal that I'd mentioned earlier of reading a book a week for 5 years, it turned out that due to life happening, scheduling, whatever, I wasn't able to maintain it. And so I started cheating the goal a little bit just to get my numbers up to look good on paper. But when I took a step back and looked at it, it was no longer relevant to the identity that I was striving for. And so I had to adjust the goal. So every time you set a goal, write things down and start working towards it, ask yourself, is this relevant to the identity that I've established for myself? Is this relevant to the kind of person that I want to become? And then the T for SMART acronym is time bound. It's very important to set a deadline for yourself because otherwise that deadline just keeps getting pushed. As mentioned before, I typically pick about 5 years out. 1 year, I think it's just not enough time to really build momentum. 10 years is almost too far because it feels too dreamlike or too ethereal. It's still often like Neverland. Whereas 5 years, it's like I can kind of glimpse 5 years down the road, and based on the direction I'm headed, I can kind of anticipate that. So 5 years to me is like the sweet spot. It's enough time to build great momentum, but it's not so far that you get lost. Okay, so now that we've got the structure, we started with identity. Set up that foundation for yourself. Use the SMART acronym to structure your goals. And from there, it's simple backwards planning. If in 5 years from now, I want to get my master's in philosophy, then there are certain milestones that have to take place in order to achieve that. In 5 years, that's me walking across the graduation stage with the goofy hat and the cool diploma now. In 1 year, what needs to happen? Well, I, at the very least, need to find a school to attend that meets my requirements to get that master's. Maybe it's talking to multiple universities and reaching out to see which is the best fit. Maybe that's the milestone you need to hit for that first year. Maybe year two, it's enrolling. We're all working professionals here. It's like how, which program will allow me to take the time I need to not only work, take care of myself, but also do school part time, if that's your case. So this, so that's why we do 5 years. It's like spread things out, make it a little bit easier on yourself. But by backwards planning, you know which milestones need to be tackled and need to be addressed in order to hit your goals. Another example might be maybe I want to lose 100 pounds in 5 years. And so if you break that down over 5 years, that's 20 pounds a year. And that is very doable. When you look at the number 100, that seems a bit intimidating. But when you spread it out and you only have to lose 20 pounds this first year, you know, that's less than 2 pounds a month. That is significantly more manageable than looking at that number 100 on the scale. And and the reason behind backwards planning is not only to give you specific milestones to hit, but when you break things down all the way down to the daily level, the daily task that's required for any particular area of life is so bite sized that it's easy to do. And that's the name of the game. We want things easy enough to do that you can maintain consistency for a long time. I mentioned New Year's resolutions a little bit ago, and I want to revisit that. I think one of the main reasons New Year's resolutions fail so often is we'll take the gym, for example. New year, new me. I'm going to get shredded this year. And so they walk into the gym January 1st and just destroy themselves on whatever piece of equipment they use. Maybe it's free weights, maybe it's the treadmill, whatever. And then the next day they do it again. And then the next day they do it again. And by day four, they are hurting. It like hurts to sit on the toilet at this point. And so the progress is now stunted because we have a couple of roadblocks to navigate. Not only is your body hurting, but now your brain is dreading this process because it's more than you can handle right now. But if you spread those goals out over long enough time, the daily action required is small enough that you don't experience that, or you experience that at a significantly lesser degree. And now you can navigate those roadblocks way easier. You're not dreading going to the gym. You're craving it because you didn't break yourself off the day before. You left still hungry for the gym. And so you're excited about the next day because you know you're making progress. You might not see it on the scale after a week. You might not see it in the mirror after a week, but because you've been able to track this week of progress, you know you're making progress down this path because you're consistent. And it's not based on like I don't want to go to the gym. I'm dreading it. Does that make sense? Perfect. Okay. So we talked about identity. That's first. We talked about establishing the goals themselves in each of the categories. And now we talked about backwards planning. Chris, why are you so like adamant about each of these steps? When I was going through the Q course, there was a portion called land navigation, and by far my favorite part of the Q course. I loved land nav. It was so much fun being out in the woods by yourself, walking through the wilderness at night with no flashlight or anything. You just bushwhacking through, and all you have is a map and compass. It is so much fun. I'll tell you a story though. So it was during the Q course. It was during a block where we had to do a bunch of other gates, like 5 Mile Run and some other stuff, and then the land nav portion. And I was so excited because I love land nav. And we get out there, and the weather was not cooperating. It was just dumping rain on us. The cadre had smoked us like for an hour before we started, so we're all like dead tired already. So it wasn't a great start. and I was already a little bit poopy face about this process. So I get my first point, I plot it, and I start heading towards my point. I get to that point, and then I was struggling. Man, I just couldn't find the next point. Finally, time is like dragging on. We have a time limit. We have to be done by like daylight. And so I'm like running out of time. I'm starting to panic a little bit. And I finally find this second point. I'm like, all right, Chris, you can make it. Just keep going, keep going. And so I get to my second point, plot my point, tuck my map into my flick or my chest rig, and start bebopping towards my next point. Uh, I had to stop after several hundred meters to do a map check. So I reach in to grab my map, and it's gone. And the amount of panic that I experienced in that moment was unreal. Oh no, the one thing I had to do was to navigate the wilderness, and the tool that they gave me, I lost. I was freaking out. And so I did an about face and ran back to my last point, looking on the ground all over, trying to find this map that had clearly fallen out of my chest rig. I didn't find it on the way back. So I got to the point, turned around again, and started very slowly, methodically trying to find this map. And I never found it. And so the time had ended. Like we had to start making our way to the roads to be picked up because we're a bunch of losers because we didn't finish the mission, right? And so not only was I like super bummed that I didn't get all of my points, but I also had to tell the cadre, I lost my map. And that itself was super embarrassing. And on top of that, it was the worst cadre to tell. We can bleep his name out later, but Sergeant Panicetti, he was the meanest dude. And he was just, you ever seen Jersey Shore? He was like one of the characters from Jersey Shore. He talked like with like, "Hey, what are you talking about? Let me see your abs." And like he was just a jerk. And he's the one that smoked us before we started. I hated this guy. And of course, he's the one that was picking me up. And so I had to tell him, "Excuse me, Sergeant, I lost my map." And he's like, "You're such a loser. Go get in the back of the truck." And so it was miserable. Uh, Good news, I eventually got to try again and crushed it and got all my points. So no big deal. But all right, Chris, why did you tell us that silly story? I told you that story because navigating life without a little bit of structure to your goal setting is like trying to find your next point without a map. You might even really enjoy the process, but if you don't have the right tools in place, you're just walking around in circles in the darkness, in the wilderness, and it's not fun. So the tools I've given you today, the identity exercise, creating SMART goals, the backwards planning process, that is me handing you map and compass to get to the life that you want. Okay, so last night we talked about purpose, structuring that, carving that marble away so you can start to see the artwork that your life can become. Today we talked about goal setting, which is first and foremost establishing the kind of person you want to be and setting those goals on top of that foundation and backwards planning so you have a very clear process on a day-to-day basis on how to get there. Okay, we'll open it up for questions. What do you got?
Um, First of all, I have a question about, I think I got lost on like the three bullet points on the last part. Like you said, the third one was like backwards planning.
Yeah.
But what was like the first, exactly like first and the second one?
Yep. So the first one, establish that identity. Create
Okay.
those present tense I am statements. I am a constant learner. I am the calmest one in the room. I am the anchor of my family. Whatever those look like for you,
Okay.
and we can dig into that more if you want. That's first. Next is establishing those SMART goals. So
Oh,
specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bound, and then backwards planning.
okay. Now, yeah, now I got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I've got one.
Yeah, send it.
Yeah, so you mentioned that we often overestimate what we can do in 1 year and underestimate what we can do in 5. Now, especially, and then you add it on with especially when we consider all the 5 areas, right? So I'm curious because I've had quite ambitious goal for all the 5 areas, but in the last year I've seen that when you try to fill out, if we look at them like buckets, 5 areas, when you try and fill one bucket, and all of them are quite big, and you want to fill one to the max, you're
Yeah,
gonna have to leave like other buckets. So
sure.
I've been back and forth with some buckets that have been filled. Sure, I'm doing progress across the board, but
Yeah.
it's sometimes you're leaving away some areas and then going back to them later on. How do you work on like filling the buckets? Are you focusing on 2 or 3 at a time, or on 5?
Great question. And it's kind of talking about balance, right?
Yeah,
And most of you have heard me refer to this. I don't believe in balance. I believe in harmony. And what I mean by that is if you look at a symphony, the instruments don't have the same amount of playing time for each of them. But when they play the appropriate notes at the correct time, it makes amazing music. And that's how you can look at these 5 areas. Some goals might be more ambitious than others. Some might be relatively simple. Um, some of them are going to require more time and energy to fulfill than others. So how do you still create value for each of those buckets? And the example I'll use is like career and finances is one bucket for me, right? And so working all day requires 8 hours of my time at least, plus a lot of mental bandwidth and energy in that bucket. So how then do I balance that time then that I spend with my daughters? Well, I think balance again is the wrong word. I can't spend another than 10 hours with them because then I would never be able to sleep. And so the way I reconcile that is if this bucket is requiring a majority of my time and energy, the 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 time I spend with my daughters has to be of such high quality that it evens out. So it's not necessarily the same amount of time and energy, but it's of high enough quality that it's worthwhile. It's not us just sitting playing on my phone, her playing on her phone. It's us going to the park and her telling me about her stories that she's writing or what she wants to do or all the drama in her fifth grade class. Those are the moments that create the high quality as opposed to equal amounts of time and energy. Does that kind of make sense?
absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Anybody else?
Does each I just totally lost it. Does each bucket need to have its own goals? So are you saying that we need to have an emotional goal, a physical goal, financial goal, spiritual goal, and so on?
I would recommend it. And here's why. If you don't have something to strive for in each of those areas, you will just wander. It's like walking around in the woods at night. If you at least have something to strive for, you can you can create a mechanism by which you can track progress to whether or not you're growing in that area. Maybe another way to word it is not a goal for one of those, but rather has growth been achieved in that particular area. Uh, One example is my emotional category. If my if my identity is I'm the calmest man in the room, well, how do I quantify and measure that? How do I measure if I am calm or not? It's one of those things that's hard to put a number on or like measure a bucket like I am this much calm or this much calm, Stuff like that is hard to quantify, but I can measure progress. I can measure practices that lead me to my desired end state. And so I may not be able to put an exact number on how calm I am in a particular room, but I can measure how many times I've engaged in practices that would lead me towards a calmer state of mind, but whether that's prayer or meditation or whatever. And so kind of to your question, if you maybe can't come up with a specific goal for one of those categories, but you have a firm foundation, that identity of who you want to be in that category, maybe it's as simple as like, okay, this is the practice that I think will lead me towards that identity. And I'll at the very least track that practice.
Okay. That makes sense.
Eric says meditation practice brings you to a calmer state and helps to channel your energies. 100%. I totally agree with that. Yeah. Cool. Anybody else? Or Lee, you got another one?
Yeah, I was kind of waiting to see if anybody else had anything. I'd wait for a second.
Fire away, my friend.
Okay. Using your identity, so saying this is the person that I want to become. From that, you're saying build your goals in your 5 areas based on that identity. So when you hit your goals, so let's hypothetically, I personally think that weak men are emotional men. And by that I mean they react emotionally to a situation versus with assessing the whole situation and then coming up with a logical approach to whatever versus just reacting based on emotion, right? Just like, oh, somebody's crying, so I feel bad, or whatever. You using anger or being mad to justify doing whatever. And so in my own personal goals, my emotional goal is to be emotionally stable and rock solid. All right. And so somebody says an off-colored remark to me, and instead of getting upset because my emotions were hurt, I look, logically, I step back, I assess why or what the reasoning is. I've achieved my emotional goal. So then what goes after that? Do I pick a new emotional goal, or do I say, okay, out of my 5 areas, number 5 is accomplished. Now I still have my 4 other goals to reach after.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this can be applied to any area of life that we've kind of set up. You'll find that even though you've set this big 5-year goal, if you're consistent, more often than not, you will hit that goal before the 5-year mark. So then what do? I would argue it's time to then reassess and set a new goal. I'm a firm believer that you're never done. I met guys in group that they got their Green Beret, and that was enough. Getting it once, and they coasted on that achievement for the rest of their career, and it showed in how they presented their body and dressed, etc. So instead of saying, all right, I've achieved this one, I don't have to think about it anymore or worry about it. It's like, okay, are we able to fine tune it? Are we able to improve it in any capacity? Or is there something new I want to venture out and pursue in that particular realm of life? I don't want you to ever get stagnant or think that you're done, because you're never done. Until that day when we're no longer here, that's when you can take a break and relax a little bit. But the intent is for constant improvement. And I mentioned this in the book, but Travis, my buddy Travis, and I, we both got to a point where we want our Army careers to be a chapter in the book and not the whole achievement, which requires a mindset of like, all right, what's the next mountain? What's the next adventure I can go on? What's the next thing I can achieve? And not just to accumulate achievements, but rather because I love life so much and I think I have so much more potential. How far can I go? Hopefully that made some sense. Cool. Any other takers? Question, comments?
All right, I got one more.
Send it.
What is a benchmark goal in these areas? Do you have like, okay, let me back up just a little bit so the picture's a little bigger.
Yeah.
Some people struggle with setting those goals because they don't know what would fall in the category of those 5 areas.
Sure.
Do you have like in the classroom somewhere or somewhere in your workbook that says a good financial goal would be to have $2,000 saved? That's a good starting point. So in the next 12 months, you should be able to save 12, or I was gonna say 12,000, which is a pretty good goal. You should be able to save $2,000 in the next 12 months. And at $2,000 a year, in 5 years, you'll have 10,000. Does that make sense, the question? So do you
Yeah,
have a benchmark for each one of those goals, and where can we find it?
I don't have one like in the classroom, but it's a great question. In the workbook, there are a couple of examples of like the 5-year goals. Now, when you're looking at that, as you're envisioning the life that you want and your goals for 5 years from now, you can rewind it and say, okay, if this is where I want to be in 5 years in whatever category, what does that first year look like? That can become the benchmark. That can become like the starting place of like, all I got to focus on is this right now. And that's part of the reason why we backwards plan in this process. Sometimes if we only are looking at the goal off in the distance, it can become overwhelming, and it's like I'm never going to hit that, or it's like too big. And that's why we set them aside and work with the backwards plan, because then it focuses you back in on the 25-meter target, the thing that's like right here that I can tackle. And so maybe if your 5-year goal is to have $50,000 saved up in the bank, then break that down. That's 10K a year. That's less than $1,000 a month for that first year. Now, things like finances and even physical fitness are interesting because it might start off kind of slow, but as you build momentum by like year 2, 3, things pick up and you start hitting that compound interest of effort. And so maybe the benchmark is really like a psychological benchmark. So mathematically, it's 10K saved for that first year, but maybe you really just need the psychological win of I can do this. And maybe it's you set it for smaller, like, okay, 5K saved for that first year, divide that by 12, whatever that is. Was that a little over $400 a month, something like that. So once you hit that psychological benchmark, it's like, this is possible. I was able to do it today. Like I was able to do it. This is totally doable. Let's up the ante for year 2. So maybe it's not 5K saved in the bank for year 2. Maybe it is 5K for year 1. Maybe it's an additional 7K. Maybe it's an additional 8K, something like that. So you can kind of scale it. And again, part of that is really just to get those psychological wins under your belt, because that's where I think the momentum really kicks in, is like getting those easy wins tackled that allow you to build that momentum.
That is exactly what I was. Uh, yeah, you nailed it. You nailed it.
Awesome. Cool. Anybody else? All right. I want to thank you all for being here. Like I said, this means a lot to me that you guys show up and hang out with me. I know some of this is repeat for a couple of you, but it's always good to kind of revisit these principles and touch on them once again. So thank you again. I'm grateful for all of you. If you guys need anything from me, shoot me a message and I'll definitely get back to you.